In this video, I'll be repairing the wood floor in my office closet. So I am still here in the midst of my office remodel. And one of the things I need to do is I need to repair the wood floor that is in the closet. Now, if you remember, I took out a wall that was between the closet and the office, and that wall is now bare. So you can see here, there's a gap. That's where the wall used to be. If you remember, I patched the pipe right here that used to run up and down. So I want the wood floor to come up to this spot right here. The problem is that I don't have that. These wood floors, they're red oak. And so I went and bought a piece of red oak from the hardware store because I didn't have any. And so this piece of red oak is what I'm going to use to patch this hole right here. If you look closely, you notice the problem is that these boards aren't straight. Because when they were laying it this way, and this was up against the wall. There was no reason that that had to be straight. So what I need to do is I need to first cut this straight, and then I need to put in a groove, and then add a matching groove, or a tongue I should say, to this board, cut it to size, and then put it in. I first tried using a track saw with a plunging feature, but the space was too small, and without a track, the track saw is really hard to keep straight. From there, I decided that the best thing to do would be to use a router. So I screwed in a board that could be used as a straight edge, and I made successively deeper cuts to straighten out the edge of the wood. I also used a Dremel tool and a chisel to get the pieces on the edge that the router can't quite get. It was right at this point that I started looking at the wood more closely. Now, I haven't been a serious woodworker for a really long time, but ever since I moved here to Pennsylvania about 4 years ago, I've been really interested in the trees that grow here, the hardwood lumber that comes from here, and I've done a lot of work to learn what the different trees are, what they look like, both the live trees as well as the lumber. And when I looked at my wood floors, I noticed a few things that made me think. The first was the color of the wood. I noticed that it was kind of a brown, which is more of what you'd see in white oak. I also looked at the size of the pores, and I realized that my floors were actually white oak and not red oak. I have a bunch of white oak pieces in my shop, and so I returned the red oak board from the hardware store, and I went to my wood pile to pull out a piece of white oak. Once I picked out a piece that would work, I joint it and plane it to size. Most wood floors are made with a tongue and groove, which helps the wood fit together and controls warping and seasonal changes. My white oak board isn't wide enough for a tongue, and so I decided that I would add a groove to both sides and use what's called a spline to keep them together. According to fine woodworking, a spline is a strip of wood, plywood, or other material inserted into matching grooves or plows along the edges of two boards. The purpose is to reinforce and align the edges. And one important thing that it says is that a spline can be used as a substitute for a tongue and groove. I had originally planned on using a router bit to cut the groove for the spline, but I quickly realized that it wasn't going to be possible, so I came up with another solution. And this part is where it gets a little iffy. The old timers might call this a Mickey Mouse job. You know, when you're doing DIY, you're doing things for yourself. You don't have the best tools. You don't have the best equipment. You use what you got. And so I thought about it. I was trying to figure out what I could do to cut that groove. And so here's what I did. I used a biscuit joiner. Biscuit joiners are not meant for cutting grooves like this. They're really meant for cutting small holes to insert little pieces of wood called biscuits to join panels together. I used one of them when I built my door. So after cutting the groove in the wood floor with the biscuit joiner, I do matching grooves into my white oak piece and go on from there. So the biscuit joiner was the best that I could come up with, but I'm honestly curious about you folks that watch the channel that are experienced woodworkers or have done a lot of things like this. What would you have done? I mean, what would you have done differently in this situation? I'm honestly curious. So if you do have an idea or a suggestion, put it down in the comments and let me know how you would have tackled this problem. I added the spline, glued my piece down, and filled the small gap with wood filler. Now we're ready to stand. After sanding it all down and vacuuming up the dust, I used a tack cloth to get any of the remaining dust before I stained. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. I like to experiment on smaller projects before I move on to much bigger ones. And I have an inkling that I'm going to need to refinish my wood floors throughout my house at some point in the near future. They're pretty dinged up and they need some work. And honestly, I'm not really a fan of the color. It's a very kind of a honey oak, kind of an orangey color, and I'm really more of a favor of the darker brown. So I'm using this walnut stain on this piece of wood, and this piece of wood floor here, just as an experiment. If it works out great, I may end up refinishing all of my floors in the same stain. So then I add the stain, and I'll add a few coats of sealer, and we'll see how it looks. Just about done. The last thing I did was install the trim, and I have to say that I think it looks fantastic. Now this was a small project, but I hope that you enjoyed watching me struggle and try to think of new ideas on how I could solve my problems. And again, I'm honestly interested in you folks that have some experience. How would you have solved this problem and these problems with fixing this wood floor? What would you have done differently? Leave a comment and make a suggestion. Give me some ideas for how I could do things better in the future.